Hi everyone, I'm Marianne Grimmett and I'd like to talk to you about Deborah Sampson, one of just a few women who fought in the Continental Army. She was born on December 17th, 1760 in Massachusetts. She was one of 7 children and her parents were actually direct descendants of Miles Standish, Priscilla Alden, and even Governor William Bradford. So due to the death of her father, she was bound out as an indentured servant from ages 10 to 18, after which she worked as a teacher in the summer and a weaver in the winter. So here's where her story gets a little murky because most of what we know comes from a 1797 account by Herman Mann entitled The Female Review, which was largely exaggerated and actually revised 3 times after publication. We do know, though, that Sampson attempted to join the army. According to the diary of a neighbor named Abner Westner, quote, "There happened an uncommon affair at this time, for Deborah Sampson of this town dressed herself in men's clothes and hired herself to Israel Wood to go into 3 years' service, but being found out, returned the hire and paid the damages." But she was persistent and she tried again. In 1782, she disguised herself as a man named Robert Shirtliff and joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. She served at least 17 months as a combat soldier. She escaped detection despite several close calls. At one time, she received a gash in her forehead and was also shot in her left thigh. She extracted the bullet from her thigh herself. She was ultimately discovered when she became ill during an epidemic. She was taken to a hospital and she passed out there. So she was honorably discharged on October 23rd, 1783, as the only woman to earn a full military pension for fighting in the Revolutionary War, perhaps because her cause was taken up by Paul Revere himself, who wrote that he expected Sampson to be a tall, masculine female, but she was actually a small, effeminate, and conversible woman. So in response to the questions posed by Ulrich and expressed through Milio, switching out Betsy Ross's name for Deborah Sampson's, if the story of Deborah Sampson didn't exist, would a woman of another profession have filled the shoes of a female revolutionary representative? How important was it to have a famous female from the American Revolution? So to answer these questions, let's actually consider the story of Anne Bailey, another woman who posed as a man in the Army. So according to Patrick Leonard, Anne Bailey was promoted to corporal just a few days after she enlisted. And upon discovery of her true identity, Captain Hunt was furious and he requested of the authorities, quote, "Please take into your custody one Nancy Bailey, who dressed herself in men's clothes, enlisted as a soldier in my company, received 15 pounds and 10 shilling bounty from this state, and then absented herself." She received 2 months in jail and a fine of 16 pounds. After the trial, Anne Bailey basically disappears from history. So Judith Hiltner writes that figures such as Anne Bailey threatened tradition by implying that sexual orientation was performative rather than innate. For if a woman dressed as a man could pass as a soldier and win heroic honors, then masculinity is not biologically determined. And we all know that in colonial New England, as William Norwood writes, godly women respected their husbands, bore children, served the family, and attended church. There was an aura of sacredness surrounding respectable women despite their status or their social situation. So, speaking of Sampson, she returns to Massachusetts, gets married, and has 3 kids. And as such, as Hiltner writes, Sampson as the fictional construct can exemplify female patriotism while also endorsing the popular ideology of chaste female influence. Unlike Anne Bailey, who dared to possess the innate skills and obvious talent to be unknowingly promoted above men, Sampson is more properly scandalous. So there's room for her in history. Between 1920 and 1950, she's primarily written about by men, and she's treated with patronizing deference as the writers kind of relish the fascinating and eccentric features of her career. After 1950, accounts of her are primarily written by women, and she becomes this representative figure who faces the biological and social obstacles of all women and provides a model for surmounting them. So after Sampson's death at the age of 66, her husband petitions Congress for pay as the spouse of a soldier. And despite stories of other women like Anne Bailey, the committee grants his request and concludes that in the history of the Revolution, quote, "there is no other similar example of female heroism, fidelity, and courage."